Hi, this is Andrew Egger, White House correspondent for the Bulwark, co-author of the Morning Shots newsletter. We're here today to talk a little bit about Kash Patel, who's President Trump's designee to be the new director for the FBI, if and when, as he plans to, he fires his current director, Christopher Wray, who he appointed back during his first term. We've got a lot to talk about Kash Patel. He's a very interesting guy. Here joining me today is Paul Rosenzweig, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy under President George W. Bush at DHS back in the day, Department of Homeland Security back in the day. He is currently a consultant and a Bulwark contributor who has written a great piece about Kash Patel up at thebulwark.com this morning. Thanks for joining me, Paul.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So Kash Patel, he's one of these really interesting, and interesting is a weird word. He's one of these guys, he's kind of like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., where like anytime you're talking about one of the things that kind of makes him alarming or problematic or anything like that, it's almost stressful because you're like, well, am I giving short shrift to all the other things that we're not talking about in the present moment? But right now, the thing that you wrote about this morning and that I also kind of parallel wrote about this morning in the newsletter was some of the kind of podcast appearances and things like that he did during the time between his stint in the first Trump administration and today. He was doing a million MAGA podcasts every day, every week, every month of his life in order to do a few things. Basically, he was shilling a lot of product at that time. He'd written a children's book, a very strange children's book about Donald Trump. He was raising money for some causes, and he was kind of trying to keep his MAGA brand current, keep his name in the conversation, in anticipation of another Trump win, and his dream job of getting in as FBI director or something very similar to it, which is now seeming to come to fruition. So Paul, do you want to just talk a little bit about, who is this guy? Probably his name has come up on the podcast before, but when you think Kash Patel as FBI director, what do you expect that to look like as he's coming in?
I think it's going to look like a dumpster fire. There's no polite way to say it. I think the best summary that you can have is that when he was proposed to be deputy director of the FBI in the last Trump administration, Barr, no liberal he said, "Over my dead body," in effect. He said there's absolutely no way that this man has the experience or the qualifications for this job. And that's absolutely true. His provenance is as a staffer, to Devin Nunes, back when the House was deciding to abdicate its complete responsibility for intelligence committee oversight, and then writing a children's book. Plus another book on gangsters in the government about how the deep state has taken over. He is basically the deepest bottom feeder of MAGA conspiracy theorists. In many ways, much worse than, say, Pam Bondi or Kristi Noem or all of the other appointees who are all problematic. But Patel is legit for fair, a conspiracy theorist who wants to use the powers of government to A, destroy government, and B, destroy anybody who opposed Trump in the first go round.
Yeah, and I think that the point to really emphasize and underscore there is, this really is a creature of kind of the MAGA media space, right? If you were a guy who listened to a lot of Steve Bannon's War Room show, or any of the kind of 1,000 little constellation programs that all just kind of exist in this decentralized, really, really populist, really kind of Trump-loving media environment. If you listen to those during the Biden years, Kash Patel was kind of inescapable, and I think we both wrote about that some today. I was just struck. We've just been kind of going through the archive a little bit, but the ones that struck me were 6 episodes that he did with really kind of an out and out white nationalist podcaster named Stu Peters. And again, another one of these guys, he's a white nationalist. That doesn't even hardly scratch the surface. He kind of burst onto the scene in 2022 with this documentary called Died Suddenly, which was a big part of kind of the anti-COVID discourse at that time, essentially saying that the mRNA shots that lifted us out of the COVID pandemic were killing people left and right, and the government was covering it up. Earlier than that, he had a less successful documentary about how the COVID pandemic could be traced back to snake venom that the government was sneaking into our water supply. This is Stu Peters, to be clear, not Kash Patel. He was a guy who regularly appeared with Nick Fuentes, the Groyper King, was kind of one of the very early adopters of this incredibly racially charged, incredibly racist, America First type rhetoric. He appeared at events with him where he would talk about how Anthony Fauci needed to be hanged for his crimes against the United States. I mean, there's a really, really kind of alarmingly crazy guy. Kash Patel does 6 shows with him in 2021 and 2022, where they kind of hobnob a lot about the elites, hobnob a lot about kind of the deep state and how all of our problems essentially are traced back to these deep government conspiracies in Washington and these conspiracies between Washington and elites in the private sector and foreign governments. And I mean, it's just, really, really kind of crazy stuff. And Kash Patel is going on these shows, just essentially to hawk his merchandise and kind of shoot the breeze with this guy. I mean, it's really kind of crazy. Can you talk a little bit about like what were some of the Patel highlights or lowlights that you were looking at when you were writing about him for us?
Well, my focus was on his threats of criminal and civil retribution and how much that echoes, frankly, the Soviet style era. Lavrentiy Beria said, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. And Kash Patel is echoing that when he says, I've got a list and we'll figure out criminally, civilly, we'll figure that out later, what we're going to do about it.
I mean, I think what so many of these guys did, whether it's Brennan, Clapper, Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Barr, Haspel, Esper, what have you, I think there's a lot of rule and law breaking.
What would be the harshest punishment you could see happening to some of these people?
Some of them being prosecuted. I mean, there's nothing harsher than that, right? Your civil liberties are taken away from you and you're sent to prison. It's about as harsh as it gets.
He's been on Bannon, obviously. He's been on Newsmax. He's been on a whole host of shows, in all of which he's essentially declared a list of people that, mutates some, who need to go to jail, who have to go to prison right away, who have to be prosecuted criminally, or if they can't do it criminally, civilly. He published a book, this book I was talking about, Government Gangsters in Government, and as an appendix to that, he put in a list of 60 people who he thinks are deep state enemies of Trump and who need to be investigated and prosecuted. And what's remarkable about some of that is it's not just your usual suspects like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or General Miley, but it's Rod Rosenstein, Trump's own deputy attorney general, for I gather the sin of appointing Robert Mueller as special counsel. Right then, there's Miles Taylor who had the temerity to speak out against him. I love this. Pat Philbin and Cipollone, the 2 White House counsels who stopped Trump from, abusing his office and trying to overturn the last election. They're on the list. And these are people who were in the first administration, I wouldn't say Trump loyalists, but Trump appointees who did the president's bidding up until the point where they reached a point where they couldn't do otherwise. So Patel has this crazed idea that there is this group of enemies who need to be investigated, and I'm not even sure that the 60 that he listed is the full scope of who he wants to investigate. It could easily include you and I. That's not a suggestion, Kash, by the way. It could easily include a whole host of other people. At least notionally, he's going to have at his fingertips the investigative might of the FBI. I think it's 12,000 special agents to go and do this criminal investigation. And then, at his influence, Trump will have the other mechanisms, IRS audits come to mind, civil investigative demands from the SEC and the CFPB and all the other alphabet agencies. It's a terrifying prospect, truly terrifying, that this man with this kind of intent will have this kind of power.
And we should talk a little bit more about that list in particular. I mean, it's such a striking thing. A lot of the people who have looked at Kash Patel as even before the FBI nomination, just seeing him as somebody who is potentially going to come in to a second Trump administration, really looked at him as kind of the poster child for the kind of unbelievably personally fervent in his loyalty to Donald Trump. And not a whole lot else driving him. The kind of the beau ideal of like a second term Trump lackey kind of guy, who would come in with this gigantic chip on his shoulder, this list of quote unquote deep state operatives, which is really, I mean, like we should dwell on this. Truly hilarious that this particular list, like when you go down the line, there are a lot of people who wielded a lot of power in the last administration. People like Rod Rosenstein, people like Bill Barr is on that list, who kind of blocked Patel from getting an appointment. So it's like a weird combination of like people who have wronged Kash Patel personally, but in particular people who Kash Patel assesses as having wronged Donald Trump personally, right? And so you get even people like Alyssa Farah on there, or Cassidy Hutchinson, like kind of lower level aides to Donald Trump the first time around, whose supposed deep state crimes all came long after they left government, just because they cooperated with the January 6th House investigation or something like that. I mean, these are offenses that get you flagged as a supposed deep state operator in the view of the likely next director of the FBI. I mean, it's really remarkable and striking stuff. The thing that I found most interesting about what you wrote today, though, is that yes, you kind of have now Kash Patel as like the best guy Trump could pick if his aim is sort of extra legal and just kind of governmental pressure on all of these people who have wronged him in the past. But you also wrote about how, he has been so explicit about wanting to do this. And so just kind of the bloodlust has been so open and so obvious that it might actually make it difficult in ultimately to kind of get the retribution that these people crave against the guys on the enemies list. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, one can only hope so. In the United States, there's this doctrine of vindictive prosecutions that prohibits the use of government power in a vindictive way. Now, in general, most claims of vindictiveness fail. I mean, almost every politician who's ever been within the sights of the federal prosecutors, including Donald Trump, has raised a vindictiveness claim. And the reason they fail is that the doctrine is that so long as there's an objectively reasonable basis for the prosecution, the vindictiveness claim is the presumption of vindictiveness is wiped away. So if I forget the name of that congressman who hid cash in his freezer a number of years ago, he said he was being prosecuted because he was a Democrat and it was a Republican administration. And the answer was no, you're being prosecuted because there's cash in your freezer. Right? When Trump made this claim, the answer was no. You're being prosecuted because there's contested evidence, but there's colorable evidence that you stole classified documents and tried to overthrow an election. But there's a twist to that, which is that even if there is objective evidence of a crime that would justify your prosecution, if there is facially adequate evidence of actual vindictiveness, that the reason we're doing this is not because of that crime, but because we really hate you, then that actual vindictiveness will allow a judge to dismiss a prosecution. And what Kash Patel in his adulterated, conspiracy-minded brain has done is given the best evidence possible of actual vindictiveness by essentially saying, these are the people I'm going after. And it doesn't matter what they are. Criminally, civilly, we'll work that out later. And that's a direct quote. We're going to do this. And so that's strong evidence that anything that comes out of a Patel-led FBI investigation that eventually makes it into a prosecutorial decision will be the product not of legitimate investigative concerns and real crimes, but his fevered anti-conspiratorial brain.
Yeah, and I just to kind of re-underscore one point there. I mean, you just said it's a direct quote. It's a direct quote. I mean, that Kash Patel has previously said on another one of these podcasts where he's just going on to like kind of tell these people, yeah, I'm your guy. I'm the guy to go get the deep state. That there's going to be consequences for these people, and then direct quote, word for word, whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. So I mean, I think to your point, I mean, about as direct and striking as you could get. I do kind of wish like we've all kind of gotten an education over the last decade or so, right? In how strong all of these kind of norms and institutions and guardrails that exist, they've gotten a bit of a workout. And on some things, like presidential emergency powers, for instance, we've kind of come around to the realization, these were a little bit more just kind of norm driven than we thought, right? It kind of turns out that a sufficiently shameless president with sufficient kind of partisan buy-in from his team in power can kind of declare anything a national emergency, which unlocks sort of extremely sweeping presidential powers to do all kinds of things, right? This is very much not my bailiwick, these legal doctrines that you're talking about right now, but I think it'll be interesting. Hopefully we never get to the point where we actually have to kind of like kick the tires on these things in court, right? And figure out how much actual protection you get in terms of
that
an
is
extremely
a
malicious
fair point.
FBI director who's called you out by name.
That's a fair point. Traditionally, I mean, typically these vindictiveness claims are tossed off by the courts because they don't have a lot of there behind them. And Patel is going to give us a shot at it. And honestly, it's not 100% clear that the courts will step up and prevent him from acting. And indeed, one has a kind of, I don't want to state it out loud too loudly, but I guess it will, a fear that even the courts are going to recede somewhat. I mean, one looks at things like the immunity decision and one says, the Trump immunity decision, one says maybe the courts are not going to be the bulwark that we thought they were going to be.
Yeah. Can only be one of those, it turns out, and we'll see how well we do. I guess the one other thing I'd ask about, and again, this is kind of grim as well, is obviously, this hopefully would come into effect. This vindictiveness kind of safety valve that you talk about. If Kash Patel were to actually soldier ahead, were to bring some kind of like spurious criminal or civil charges against people on his list or others like them, obviously you're glad you have that in the end. But you also write that it's sort of cold comfort for quite a while. We're not talking about some rinky-dink little county sheriff who's got his eye on you. I mean, like, can you just talk a little bit about before we even get to testing the vindictiveness standard, like what's the danger? What are we looking at here with a guy like this at the top of the FBI?
I think that the average citizen just does not appreciate how much of a burden it is to even be the subject of an investigation. I mean, we have a saying. It's a mean saying. Yeah, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride. Which means, I'm going to take you for the ride, and even if you win in the end, you're going to suffer along the way. And think of it from the perspective of anybody who might be subject in this investigation. Let's begin with the obvious thing. It's going to cost you a piss pot full of money to defend yourself, to hire a good lawyer. Second, it's going to take a huge amount of your own personal time and attention, to defend yourself. It's going to wreak mental havoc on you. The pressure of being under investigation should not be underestimated. It's going to ruin your reputation or adversely impact your reputation. It's going to wreak havoc on your family. If you've got a wife and kids, I sometimes have thought that they are in a worse place than the guy under investigation because he at least knows what he's facing. In your spouse's mind, it's the imagination run wild of what's going to happen. All of that is brought to bear before we get to the point where you're indicted and your motion to dismiss for vindictiveness is granted. And it's a years-long process with immense costs to the subject of the investigation. And it's, it's bad enough that the system imposes that cost on people as to whom there is a legitimate concern about criminality, who are eventually acquitted or eventually excused by a grand jury, right? That's a big social. It's even worse when those costs are imposed on the political whim of conspiracy theorists like Kash Patel.
Well, that's kind of a grim note, but I guess we will leave it there for now. Thank you to Paul Rosenzweig for joining me to talk about some of this stuff. And thanks to you all for listening, watching, reading The Bulwark. I hope you can subscribe to our YouTube page, go to thebulwark.com, subscribe to the Morning Shots newsletter. There's all kinds of ways to get our stuff. We'll come find you wherever you are. So thank you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.